All right. We have a surprise guest here. So Reid just texted me and said there's an electrician at his house and they just like threw some breakers or something. So he's going to try to figure that out. So I have Nicole here to walk through this with me. She's never seen these slides before. So I'll be presenting. Welcome, Nicole.
Thanks.
This is the Digible webinar.
Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. All right. Oh, here comes Reid.
Hey, late to the party here. Apologies.
Yeah, Reid, I was just bringing in Nicole as a surprise guest, so now we can present to her. Well, I said you had like some sort of electric breaker problem.
Yeah, I am dealing with that, and now I can't get my video going, but Nicole is far more attractive to look at, so good to have her by your side.
Yeah, she did her hair this morning, probably knowing that it was going to be a situation.
It says that I can't start my video because the host has stopped it, so it appears that you are sabotaging my video here.
That's weird. It doesn't give me the option to do anything with your video.
All right. Well, you guys are enough for everybody, I'm sure. So how do we get this party going?
Yeah. So Reid, I did this to you last time, but why the heck are we having a webinar? What are we talking about?
Yeah. Well, last time I think very deadpan, I said it had something to do with this COVID or coronavirus. So I can't use that again, but yeah, it's to give you an update from where we started. So we really treated the last webinar as more of a baseline because we know obviously this is all data and that everybody's kind of hanging on edge about, whether it's on the marketing side or just on the operational side. So we were trying to get a hold of what things look like really kind of pre-COVID. And then from that point, we've been doing weekly updates to show what the changes have looked like. And now we have a full 30 days behind us. So hopefully this is a, far more, I guess, meaningful update that everybody can appreciate.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get into it. So yeah, we did our first webinar on the 23rd of March. We're doing obviously today on 4/20. I feel like insert some sort of marijuana joke that I don't have prepared. And then we're going to do one more webinar. Well, at least one more, depends how long this coronavirus thing goes on the 25th of May. So we'll send out that link later on for people to sign up. So first off, Reid, we always get into industry impact. So let's talk about how absorption rates and leasing are looking right now. So I think you and I were talking about this slide in our prep call right beforehand, but it's really interesting. Like when we started pre-coronavirus for this year, stabilized properties were available units for 436,000. And on stabilized properties, there's been a heck of an increase, as you can see with this blue line over time. And this is across the entire U.S. So since coronavirus happened, there's been a huge increase in the amount of available units on stabilized properties. Week over week, though, we're really lucking out. We've only added 1,000 new stabilized units. And this time we didn't break out new builds versus stabilized because there wasn't a material difference, but new builds have been they've been sucking up more of the inventory. So there's been fewer new build inventory, but more stabilized. So people are leaving stabilized properties to go to new build.
Yep. Not to be Captain Obvious here, but I guess I will be. You can see that is a steady climb there as far as the available units really in the month of March. And nice to see, of course, everybody, no pun intended here, is looking for that peak. We'll see in the next couple of weeks whether this continues, whether we actually start seeing those available units coming offline. Some of this cycle, I think you could expect regardless, just as far as initially seeing the units going off in the first couple months of the year, and then, through new builds and just natural patterns, you start to see it come up a little bit, but obviously it's way more pronounced than what you'd expect normally without COVID.
Cool. And we have a couple more slides just to look at the data a little bit differently. So this one is now not the US, but we broke out each market. Each of the top 20 markets is a separate line. And I know this feels like a heck of a lot going on. So if you look at New York is the blue line, so it's really easy to take a look at. New York had actually been absorbing units the week before last, and this last week it's more flat on the amount of units. Versus if you look at Seattle, it's more this steady as she goes, but it's been fairly flat the last number of weeks. And I think, Reid, we were told that there were 2 outlier states involved here, and in a negative way, right?
I think it was just cities, I believe, which was Denver and Vegas, if I have that right. And speculation would be just the amount of new construction in those markets. I think you had seen something like that on a Real Page webinar about Vegas, and certainly we know Denver in our own backyard just how much new construction has been developed. So that's just speculation, but I think that's probably what is driving that right now.
Yeah. All right, and now the way that we broke this out is instead of going the top 20 markets, we're isolating high COVID states versus low COVID states, and then we pulled out Washington, New York as well, since they seem to be the two most impacted. So what you can see here is that on the green line, New York is again about even with absorption rate. Unfortunately, Washington State had some nice respite the week before last, like they started absorbing some units, but then it's been on a downward slope this week. And I'm not sure how much of that would be just like the monthly seasonality at this point, because it looks like about a month ago as well that there's, well, I guess it is a little bit ahead of schedule. Maybe not. It took a dip about the third week.
Well, I think this follows a lot of sentiment within these markets and states. If you're, reading up on them, even if you're not in Washington, just that there was, I guess, some optimism coming out of the free fall that you see reflected here in Washington, where they weren't seeing as many cases, and you were hearing more about kind of flare-ups in other states. And when we did talk to some of our clients there in Seattle specifically, they seem to feel like the anxiety had somewhat been curbed. And so that's what I would assume drove that uptick that you see there towards the end of March. And then we can only hope, obviously for them in particular, that it's just a natural, downturn. The biggest question I have when we look at these, I don't know if anybody's brought this up yet as far as questions, is how this is playing out between the different assets, meaning an A, a B, and a C. Because you can expect, obviously, in this scenario with multifamily housing and housing at large, there's going to be winners and losers. And it would seem like one of the bigger challenges is luxury right now, as everybody's kind of tightening up. And that could also be contributing, I guess, those swings inside of this is are the B assets filling up versus the A's are struggling more, and then what's happening with the C's. So that obviously gets beneath all this. This is just macro, but interesting to think about.
Yeah, that Real Page webinar that Reid mentioned, I had attended one about pricing and availability. And it was actually pretty early on in the COVID process, but their speculation was that the luxury properties were going to see a downtick, that C's were going to have struggle with payments, and that B's were going to be the ones that, if you will, like won in this scenario. So people that were leaving A properties and moving into B, but also the fact that B, they predicted had more of the, I'll say, like middle class folks that would be less impacted than those in the C category. So the C properties they predicted were going to have struggle to keep their jobs and keep paying rent. So they thought B was kind of like at the most advantageous of all the properties.
Yeah, makes sense.
Last thing, I know our data team was super psyched here to see that lowercase states had actually started to absorb some units to get just beyond flat this last week. So it has been on a nice little upward trend. And if you look at the higher case states, we're not quite there yet, but definitely we're making a comeback from the end of March. All right, so let's move into marketing. That's obviously our specialty. So Reid, I know you were super excited about this one, and I almost lost my mind on the next slide. So I'll let you take this one so I can still be excited about the next one.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, for the marketing industry, this is maybe the most important slide, which is what does demand look like? And so this is obviously coming directly from Google on apartments for rent, like what that search volume looks like. And the green line is this year, which you see it obviously with a pretty significant fall over the last few weeks, but it's been making its way back up, and in particular, just here in the last week or two, it is catching up to last year, which is just a terrific sign. And I think, again, a lot of this has to do with just sentiment by state and nationally. And of course, we're hearing a pretty interesting debate between, federal and state on, how they plan to stage into the reopening of these economies. but most of them are moving that direction. It's just a matter of how they're going to implement that. So that's obviously, I would think, a good sign to renters and our industry at large, is that there'll be more, I guess, of folks out on the street and less online leasing, given that they're following, the right guidelines as they go about that. So I think not to get ahead, but we'll still be putting a huge priority ourselves, and would recommend anybody else do so, as far as taking advantage of, or trying to promote your online tours and virtual tours and things like that. But now it seems like, from an operational standpoint, people should be thinking about, okay, if we do reopen our doors in the leasing office, what does that look like? And then how do we actually get that message out?
Yeah, and I think the positive thing that we have noticed is, obviously, coronavirus searches have been declining. So people have kind of gotten over most of the news cycle. It's still happening. But the unemployment, which is the most unfortunate side of things, you'll see these dips, and those are happening on the weekends. So on the weekends, people are just, well, they're not involved in the job search as much. But it's just really a shame to see that we still have 3 weeks that look like they're about even with the amount of folks that need to find new employment. All right, so this is where I got really excited. So back to good news. This blue line is last year's cost per click data. This orange line is this year's cost per click data. And we had seen this massive spike right after COVID hit of cost per click for this year versus last year. But if you look at this, finally we have crossed back over where last year cost per click is more expensive than this year's cost per click, which is significant for a couple of reasons. I mean, for those that have listened to the weekly updates, we've seen a massive spike across the country in cost per click data related to apartments.com, and I'll say CoStar increasing their spend across the board. So what this is showing to me now, or what this is indicating, is that there's a lot of apartments that are backing off on their marketing, more so than search volumes backing off. So search volume's not quite where it was last year. So there's more people backing off on spend, more so than the appetite is, and the market has declined. And yet that's even still making up for the cost per click increases that we had seen across the board from the CoStar extra $100 million that they're going to spend this year. So in some markets, in our case study that we published last week, I think we had seen a 40-something% increase in cost per click from CoStar just going in heavy. And now, again, like the positive news for those folks that are still able to advertise now, your cost per click, or your dollars are reaching more now than they were able to last year.
Yeah, and that 40%, just to be clear, is the overall effect that, and it wasn't just CoStar, but certainly they were leading the spend there. But when you isolate just apartments.com, I was seeing 200 to 400% increase in spend in most markets. So they definitely were pouring in media spend, which is a good thing. Obviously, I mean, I don't know how righteous it is, for them, but they are trying to generate more leads during this stretch. It was pre-planned, but hopefully that outcome's being felt at the property levels.
Pre-planned, but as we had talked about in one of our updates, they're not really required to do that at this point, right? Like most people have their contract signed. They don't need to keep spending the money that they had committed to, and yet they are. And so if you're on an ILS right now, you should, I guess, feel warm and fuzzy that they're doing what they can to make sure that they're still bringing you leads. And previously, when they were doing that, it was driving up the cost of your own search campaigns. But now we're back to an area where actually it's not driving up your cost of your own search campaign. So
I'm sure that's the exact phrase that they're using to describe their feelings right now.
Warm and fuzzy.
Warm and fuzzy, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So website traffic by source. This is one that we were really interested to see on the first webinar a month ago. And things have not really changed that much. I know, Reid, we've looked at this a few times, and each time you ask me, like, did this slide really get updated?
Yeah. So this is great, though. I mean, this is what you should be looking for, marketer, even operator. It's like, where should I be spending my money? This is not about it as much how much. And this is just as clear as it gets. You should be putting money right now into social media. And we speculated in the first webinar that this was probably because people obviously are on their phones and computers all day, every day now. Therefore, there's a lot more inventory to be had, and there's a lot more casual shopping. So this gets into your branding, where it's like, as people do hopefully get more confidence, and you start to see some of the more regular, I guess, leasing activity that you're used to, that you've done your part in preparing for that. And so if you haven't already either increased your budget there or put some money there, I would highly encourage doing that in the month of May.
Yep. And I believe, Nicole, I'll put you on the spot, but we're still seeing a decrease in CPM cost on paid social.
Yeah, it's pretty much kind of similar to what we had seen the first webinar, but basically the demand has increased. So the cost per thousand have significantly gone down. So you're getting more bang for your buck. Your impressions are going further. You're able to hit people with more ads on social than previously. So we're still seeing that from the reports that we've looked at over the last few weeks.
Cool. All right. And this is website traffic engagement. So what we were trying to get at here is like, well, this is interesting. So now we know we can send people to our website. In particular, as Nicole just said, paid social, you're seeing it more cost effective means to do so. But once they're getting to the website, what's happening? And our data team was super excited about this as well, but they broke out high case states versus low case. And then from Google Analytics, they're looking at the average session duration that people are spending on a website. And they were excited because the orange is the lowercase states. And we're seeing similar engagement now as to what we saw before COVID. So there had been this little spike that we had seen that first week of March, but after that, it was on a decline. But this last week, things popped back up to be more similar to what they were as far as engaged visitors pre-COVID. Unfortunately, higher case states are still in this sort of like, well, just it's not as strong of a story. They had a stronger presence ahead of time, but now it has flattened out. So I guess that's the one positive thing. It doesn't continue to decline, but it's just really not on the rise.
Yeah, we'll take a close look next week to see if it continues to bounce back up. Just over the last few days, it's looked a little bit better, but it has not recovered at all. So yeah, positive for the lower cases, but hopefully we'll see those higher cases pick back up next couple weeks.
And okay, great. Well, people are going to the website, but is this just current residents trying to figure out what's happening and how my property is responding to the crisis, or is this something else? So what the data team has done here is they've pulled out higher converting pages that show lower funnel interest in a property. So if you're a current resident, you're not looking at floor plans, you're not checking availability, you're not checking the amenities, contact us, location, or online application. Like this is all stuff a prospect would be doing. And this is really positive, but you'll see that at the beginning of the year, we just had less lower funnel traffic. But since COVID, we had taken a little bit of a downward turn to be more similar to the earlier in the year. But since then, we've been actually beating out the trend line for these lower funnel converting pages. And the last couple of weeks actually popped above the trend line.
Yeah, and I'll just say here, you might be surprised, that just in the beginning of the year that this was lower than what we're seeing post-COVID. But you have to remember that a lot of the leasing happens in January that was shopped in December and November. So you don't see as many tours or actual leases, at the end of the year, but people are looking for what's my home going to be in January. And so therefore these types of metrics would make sense that it would be a little bit lower. What's really encouraging, like David was saying, is just that, the patterns that I guess we've come to expect haven't been altered too much as far as the interest in shopping properties and then ultimately contacting them regarding leasing. So reminder on the funnel, it's awareness, consideration, and then buying. And this really, is a collection of the consideration and the buying. And yeah, trend looks really healthy.
Yeah, and I'll say separately, we actually had a client, this is anecdotal evidence, but last week they ended up leasing 15 apartments, sight unseen, all virtual tours, like through, in fact, Nicole, do you know what they were using to do, how they were handling their virtual tours?
They were doing a mix of just like, I think Facebook Live and pre-recorded. So it wasn't just like schedule a virtual tour. They had some pre-recorded video that people could watch too.
Yeah. I just couldn't believe like 15 apartments would be a good week in good times, but 15 apartments at this time is just kind of crazy.
I think it was Excelsior. I mean, we showed some best practices as far as some of the videos that folks were doing. And I forgot what she called it. I apologize, Shelly. But as I was saying, I think it'll be a smart tactic to maybe do some of those kind of homegrown videos from leasing agents or property managers showing, not to get ahead, but once they do move towards opening their doors again, just what that process looks like, just having, a resident go through that or prospect go through that, just so that it can make people feel a little bit more comfortable and know what to expect if they were to go ahead and get in their car and drive out to a property. So moving from everything's online leasing to starting to stage into, hey, we can actually meet with you again, but this is the experience that you should expect.
Okay, so this is campaign performance. Now, this is kind of interesting. It's a couple of different things coming together, but we have the gray line is conversion rate. The teal is clicks, pay-per-click, your SEM clicks, and then orange is the amount of leads generated from those clicks in any given week. And for a long time, we had been talking about the positive of this upward trend about conversion rates and how they had been improving post-COVID to pre-COVID. And we were a little concerned because there was a time here in the middle where it looked like we had peaked and that things were heading back down. But now it seems like we had an up week, we had a week slightly down, but overall our click to lead ratio is still up 1.4% to the prior period, meaning to pre-COVID. But click volume has trended down. So this is what's interesting is that cost per click was more expensive than it had been. Yet conversion rates were better. So overall, you're getting a lower cost per lead. But then cost per click has started to come down. However, conversion rate, also in 3 weeks prior than this last week was down from last week. And so it's really interesting because the way that most agencies, whether you're using us or somebody else, but most agencies try to pace evenly through the month on how many clicks they're trying to send to your website for your budget. Some will front load, but most are trying to do a pretty even pacing across the 30 days. And since clicks were more expensive the last 3 weeks, the algorithms would be pacing to spend more money. Now, all of a sudden, clicks, as we just saw, are less expensive this week. That's great, but most of the money has already been spent in the other 20 days of the month. And so this last 10 days, you should start to see more clicks to the website as long as someone hasn't overpaced your campaign. And then as you can see here, your leads should still be more profitable or a better buy now than they would have been pre-COVID. I hope that made sense, Reid. Maybe you can correct anything if I got off track.
No, I think it was good.
Hey, I win. All right, cool. Well, next slide up. So this is actually then getting down to the cost per lead. So just hitting this bullet right out of the gate, CPL has been down 5.3% since pre-COVID, but you have seen some little bit of oscillation here, and depending on what week of the month it is. So I think we had talked about this before, but something that I'm really interested to get into is figuring out what week of the month is the best cost per lead in a normal scenario, right? So like outside of these weird times, but when I used to work in automotive, the last week of the month was the best week of the month. It just always was. Like all the specials were happening. Like people sort of understood that buying a car at the end of the month was a better thing to do than at the beginning of the month. And so everything outperformed in the fourth week of the month compared to the first week of the month. In apartments, I don't know what that cycle looks like yet. So I'm curious to get into it to know if that's why we're seeing this, this wave that's happening here.
Nothing to add.
Thanks, Reid. Thanks. Overall, though, it's not like your CPL has skyrocketed. Like most folks, when they're looking at just a pure cost per lead, are looking somewhere between like $16 and $30, and so it's still in most people's like acceptable range for a cost per lead. All right, and now this slide breaks with formatting a little bit, but it's because we put Adam on the spot and asked him to pull some call volume numbers. We thought this would be really interesting. So overall, you can see Adam's points here are that month-over-month call volume has increased 6% for April. That average call duration has remained flat. So it's not that we're just getting more calls and they're crappier calls. It's about the same. And over the past, well, I'll get to that point in a second, but you'll see this trend line as far as call volume since the beginning of the year. It makes sense for seasonality purposes that more people would be interested in placing and starting to call an apartment now than they would be in January. But I know Adam was really psyched because this last week and then 2 weeks ago were the high watermark of all call volume that we've ever seen. So now there's a couple of things that go into this. One is if someone can't drive by a property, what other option do they have to do besides place a call? So there's some natural, I'll say, favoritism towards calls right now in the way that we're measuring things. That said, people are still calling apartments. And then Adam's team has been able to use some of the technology that we've been testing to find out what's happening on calls. And I was really psyched about this third bullet when we talked about it last week, Reid, but 2.8% of calls have referenced COVID since COVID started happening, which is far fewer than I would have expected. I definitely expected that there's going to be far more COVID calls. I thought it would be like 25% of the people calling are going to say, like, can you believe this coronavirus thing? But that's just not the case.
Yeah, and we didn't have this stat, I think, the first couple of weeks, or we're able to normalize it. So, meaning, like, let's call it early March, because that's when I think they would have been flooded by just residents saying, what are you guys doing? What's the policy? Just a lot of questions, right? But yeah, now it's not seemingly like a top of mind or key factor for them as they go through the process. And just putting a cherry, I guess, on your point on this slide is I would be concerned if it was flat. Even though, you might say, hey, it doesn't look like call volumes change much. But yeah, there's an obvious like uptick that you're going to get from calls just based on the fact that you can't get the drive-bys. But if you normalize this for that and say, okay, factoring for the 20 or 30% natural like increase, then it does look like call volume effectively, or just say demand is pretty consistent with what it had been. So very, encouraging sign.
Yeah. And,
does put well, I was just going to say last thing. I mean, we've talked about it with many of our clients, but just the importance now with the extra call volume on being effective at closing over the phone. It's as important as ever. A, that the call gets answered, and B, that they're taking advantage of those opportunities, because that's where it's at right now.
Yeah, I know. I'll say the positive thing from a behavior standpoint is the clients I've talked to, they've put a much higher emphasis on training calls. So I know people have heard me talk about before, but we've worked with a lot of properties where the on-site team doesn't feel as responsible for sales as maybe like the executives might expect them to feel. So typically there's not, in a lot of companies, not a lot of emphasis put on like phone handling skills and things of that nature, but folks obviously have been forced to at this point. So I see this as like as a positive thing for the industry, that now that people are training up their on-site staff, that as we exit COVID, folks should be more effective on phone calls than they had been before. So yeah, that's positive.
Yeah. Just anecdotal evidence, I would say, but on the calls that I've had recently, a lot of clients are just talking about how, to your point, David, their close rate is increasing. So typically going from a 6 to 8% average lead to lease close rate. I have some clients who have properties that are sitting about 14% right now because they're able to capitalize on those higher quality leads. So kind of all tying together, but the close rates definitely are going up.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I was just going to say the slide we don't have and wish and don't know how easy it'd be to get at this in the call analytics is just related to concessions. So I know that's something that we discussed and that we plan to have for the next webinar in a month, but just, what has been, the uptick, if any, but I think we all know that there has been as far as incentives to get people to lease right now. And then what does that look like from a campaign standpoint? So if you're running concessions, what does the performance look like? But bringing it to call analytics, I'm just curious, similar to COVID, it's like how many of these calls now are starting or including questions about, hey, what kind of concessions or rates are you guys offering during this? Because it just seems like there's a lot of different and creative, I'll say, solutions that properties are coming up with to try and help people through this stretch. It's certainly the next 90 days.
Yeah, well, we can get to with our call analytics. We can't get to concessions yet, but we can get to price sensitivity. So for our next webinar, we can have pulled like how price sensitive are people pre-COVID versus post-COVID.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
The COVID qualifier here is interesting because the 2.8, it has been trending down. So I think the last week that I saw was at like 1.6% of calls during that week were referencing COVID. So each week that we move forward is bringing down the amount of people that are actually talking about COVID. although I'm still stuck on Nicole's number right now. You're saying 6 to 8% was the pre-COVID, and now you're saying people are 14. That's pretty great. That's, I mean, Reid
Well,
and I,
that's not across the board though, Nicole, is it? Or
Yeah, no, that was just from a handful of properties I talked to. That was one property specifically where I do remember those numbers. But in general, I think the consensus is that close rates are going up because the lead quality is higher.
Yeah. Cool.
all right. So how does this impact your marketing strategy? And I took your really lofty bullet slide out from like a month ago, but I feel like you'll have some good input here now that you've been pulled into this darn thing. All right. Actually, I changed the order of this. So I'll let you explain this new slide so that it helps
Just
the week over.
Breaks our formatting here too, because I think I just quickly pulled this together. But essentially what we're looking at is the week over week trend of the marketing funnel. So just a reminder, upper funnel is more your brand awareness campaigns. So those are going to be platforms like display, Spotify, native advertising. Mid funnel is going to be more of your engagement campaigns, so social, geofencing, and email. And then lower funnel is those hard hitting converters, so paid search, and we've got some organic search filtering in there as well. So main thing here is you can see it's kind of all over the place, but if you look at that, I believe it's the darker blue, the upper funnel, you can see that click-through rate has consistently increased. So started with a peak the week of March 30th and then has been on the rise pretty much ever since. I think the biggest things there when I was looking at some of the data behind the scenes was display. So a lot of click-through rates on display have gone up week over week. The mid-funnel click-through rates, so that gray line, they have declined since February, but we're starting to see that pick back up. So you kind of saw this really steep drop off. Looks like that's the week of the 24th. So kind of last week of February, first week of March, everything dropped down. But now we're kind of seeing those continue to pick back up slightly as we head into mid-April.
Do you have thoughts around that?
I think a lot of that had to do with geofencing. So that's kind of hitting that engagement metric on the mid-funnel. But a lot of geofencing campaigns, I know us as an agency, we switched our strategy from targeting people, like employers, like location hotspots, and moving to retargeting people based on where they've been and doing a lot of competitor targeting. So I think that change in strategy, sometimes with retargeting, you'll see click-through rates drop off a little bit because that user has been engaged on the site before. So that's kind of my thoughts behind that.
I think you were also telling me ahead of time, though, that since CPMs are down with social, you're getting more reach. And typically with more reach, that impacts click-through rate.
Yep. Yeah. So I think just the broader number of impressions available, you're able to have more, to your point, you're hitting people more often, but sometimes that hurts your click-through rate. It's the whole kind of reach and frequency game. So increased reach means you're getting more exposure, but decreased or increasing that frequency kind of cause people to not click as often.
Right. Because you typically don't click on the same ad multiple times. You may get served it 6 or 8 times, but you click on it once.
Yeah.
And so then lower funnel? Yeah.
So lastly, the lower funnel engagement, they've overall been higher in April compared to March. And I don't think it's a really big swing. I think we're talking about 1.5% here, but really seeing that increase starting all the way back to January. So a lot of this has to do with seasonality as well, but increasing pretty consistently from like earlier on. So consistent increases in click-through rate week over week.
All right, Reid. Peanut gallery, what you got?
I take exception to that. No, I thought Nicole did a really great job. I think the lower funnel is more indicative of ebbs and flows. It's hard, frankly, looking at this for me, other than really that upper funnel as clear indicators, I guess, from as a result of COVID. So I think, paid social, like we said, is the biggest call out when it comes to all these different platforms as far as what you should be adjusting. And then, let some of these other platforms optimize as you normally would.
Yeah, for me, I just can't believe, for the last month, I can't get over how much the upper funnel, though, has improved during this. And most folks, I believe, their initial knee-jerk reaction was, hey, let's pull back on marketing. Things are going to be less effective. So let's only target those. And I think I may have even had the standpoint, let's only target those people that are searching for apartments right now. that are, because if they're searching, then they're still willing to move. So then they're going to be a super high quality lead. So I've been most surprised by how convincing this is from an upper funnel, by how engaged folks are with those ads. So still a reason to run those display campaigns, because if people aren't moving now, they're probably, we used to say that, I think our stat was saying that most people have already made the decision within 3 months of moving into an apartment if they're going to stay in that apartment, that like, am I renewing this for next year or not? And I think I would just expect through COVID that would be even more clear, right? Like if your property management company hasn't handled the situation well, or you've been unhappy with how your buildings handled it, then as soon as you get the chance to get out of there, you're probably, going to get out of there. So I'd expect that you're going to see retention rates be more clear about, as you say, sentiment, Reid, about a property.
Yep.
All right. So Nicole, this now is the slide that you used to be showing, but this is just week over week.
Yeah, so this is just week over week. I don't think there's any significant changes here. I mean, we've seen slight declines in both the upper funnel metrics and then slightly on search as well. But just kind of giving some more context on overall that upper funnel metric specifically. When we pulled this in February, it was 0.36%. And then in general for April, we've been averaging 1.03%. So slight differences in the week over week changes, but really seeing that February to April jump has been significant.
So going from 0.3 to over 1%.
Correct.
That's pretty crazy.
And that's just pulling out display. So there's obviously Spotify and native porting into that upper funnel as well, but display really stood out to me.
Yeah, it looks like actually your Spotify data actually looks really strong too, surprisingly, from a click-through rate perspective.
Yeah, so going from 0.37 to just under 1% for the last week of March, the first week of April for Spotify.
Just one more reminder, because I think plenty of folks on the call have not had experience with Spotify, but some great opportunities have opened up, in particular for, I think, lease ups or folks that are doing rehabs that are really trying to brand right now. That, for as little as $500, you can get a spot produced and active and running in a targeted geography for your property. And we did see really good results, not only on click-through, but also the overall impact for Google Analytics. And then native, somewhat similar, but all about education. So if you have some unique things from an amenity standpoint or elements as far as location, this is a great way to communicate that. And those are just articles that you see, and not the garbage at the bottom of a website, but if you were to go to CNN, they have what are called injection points. So there's just spots that they reserve for paid articles. But if they're done well, which we like to believe, at least when we're running them, that they can be super high quality. And I know, having a background on the publisher side, that they sometimes can get higher engagement rates or click-throughs than even regular news stories. So this also has a low price point or entry, typically $750 to $1,000, and you can get an article for one of your properties that is highly targeted. So it's not a plug as much as I just want to make sure people are clear what those channels look like, because they're kind of emerging. It's not something that we had been running a lot of at the beginning of the year, but now I feel like there's some really great opportunities to complement what you might be doing on display and some mid-funnel in order to better brand during this time.
Yeah, and on the native side, when you get an article, I think you slipped it in there, targeted, right? So unlike, hey, why would I ever, as an apartment, put an article on CNN? It doesn't just, like, the rest of CNN basically gets blasted, like, here's what's on the CNN homepage. But these injection points, as Reid is saying, are targeted just like a display ad would be targeted. So you can narrow it down to your zip code or whatever kind of radius targeting you want for those articles, so that they're relevant, and it's not just like hitting a national side of things. All right. Well, I have what's next, but I already teased Nicole. I was going to put you on the spot to talk about just more anecdotal, or what you guys on the agency side have been seeing and doing from tactics that have worked well. I think you and I had brief conversation about coronavirus, ad copy, yes or no. Just hit me with, do you have any tips and tricks or things that you think people should be aware of?
Yeah, and you might have talked about this on maybe some of the weekly updates, but I think really just getting your messaging out there and really helping your prospects understand how you're handling it. So that's anything from updating the ad copy, making sure that you're focused on the virtual tours. We've been pushing a lot of Google My Business posts. I don't know if you hit that already. But making sure that you have posts on your Google My Business page, clearly spelling out your hours and how you're handling COVID. I think making sure that you're getting that message in every single place possible, the more exposure to that, the better your prospects are going to understand how to interact with you during this time.
Cool. And you had said in the early going, you had tips about geofencing. I think you guys out of the gate were like, okay, nobody can go out, so let's use a retargeting audience at this point, geofencing retargeting audience. Has that changed, or are you guys still wanting to use?
Yeah, we pretty much did that, I think, week one, like when we found out, we moved all geofencing strategy from targeting people to where they currently are to where they've been. So the great thing about some of these platforms is that you don't have to build up an audience because it's all device ID data. You just have an audience available to you. So you don't have to kind of pixel your site and wait for that audience to build up. So I would say that is still the strategy we're leading with. However, we are working more of those competitor fences back into our strategy. So it's now retargeting based on where they've been, as well as the comp locations, because obviously everyone is at home right now. They are at those buildings. So that's also been a segment that we've seen an uptick in recently.
Cool. And then on the search side of things, is there anything interesting that I have no idea. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I think that to Reid's point, like a lot of the specials, we are seeing increased specials and concessions from clients. So making sure we're putting that every which way possible on all ad platforms. The thing I've noticed is that those concessions right now, I haven't seen as many concessions with an end date. So rather than saying, okay, this is going to be through April, it's kind of an ongoing promotion, which is helpful because then you can blast it on all of your channels and not have to worry about, okay, is this expired? So that's kind of top of mind. Like we've been updating a lot of our ads just to make sure we're including the concessions and then also not setting them to end, which sometimes can be hard because you're like, how many, ads do I push during this time period?
Yeah. And we had sent out some sort of like an article with a tip that said, whatever agency you're working with, you can end up feeding them either. Basically, it can be really hard to like submit a ticket to your agency and say like, hey, here's my concession. And then if they have like a 3 or 7 day turn, that concession may be halfway done by then. So I would encourage everybody to speak to their agency and see if there's a faster way to pass it. So one solution we found that's worked for a lot of people is just having a shared Google Sheet. In the shared Google Sheet, the management company can drop in their concession that the AdWords campaign will automatically grab on demand. So that way you can have a field that's like, okay, you can drop your concession here. The character limit is limited to X. And as long as you stay within that threshold, the search campaign will grab from that Google spreadsheet in real time and then update your concession. So you don't even have to submit a ticket to the agency. It can just be done. We've used that in other capacities too, like pricing and availability, things like that. But I think to your point about passing concessions, that can be a real just time-consuming, annoying process.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is just creative. So we've been doing a lot of creative changes, both with messaging, but also images. Typically, what we've seen is that our clients don't necessarily work with like third-party design agencies. However, it seems like there's been a few exceptions because of everything going on. And with coronavirus, they are creating these custom graphics. So we are taking those and then working those into some of our display creative as well.
Cool. And then do you have any other interesting anecdotes from like the conversion rate of calls happening or the 15 leases in a week or any of that?
Those were definitely top of mind. Those stood out for me. I feel like those were some of the best ones, but I'll noodle on it for a sec.
Okay. Reid, I don't suppose you have anything to add that you've had from anecdotal conversations?
No, not really. I just would say I think we have an opportunity to go a little further with concessions on the next webinar. So we'll do what we can to make that data, I guess, as digestible and then obviously actionable as possible. And then the other thing is that these webinars are obviously macro data, we've said it before, and we had a ton of people take us up on the offer, to get Fiona for free, which we're calling Fiona. But that will give you this data at a hyper-local level. So I'm just going to keep encouraging people to take us up on that, because I think it's super valuable as far as trying to have those conversations with operators right now, which is, are we an outlier, in Charlotte, or are we right in line with everybody else? So that's where you can really get that hyper local context that I would think each operator or marketer really wants to know.
Cool.
So I think Lurch, our CDO, was saying that, I'm going to put him on the spot, even though I don't think he's on the call, but he's going to try and get a heat map out for us for the whole country as far as what absorption rate look like, and then some Google Analytics and things like that. So hopefully that will make it that much more valuable next month.
Right. So we're going to do an updated one on May 25th. As Reid said, I know he's pushing the data team to have this basically like live tool that folks will be able to like click around and check out absorption rate in different markets and a few other really cool things that'll be up on the website that people can use. So that should be hopefully there by May 25th. Other than that, I think call analytics, Reid, is something that we're going to dive more into for next month, both around concessions, but also just what else is happening on the call. So how is the frequency of leads increased, like conversations about leads, or the leads that come in, are they truly more impactful leads? Like it seems like what we're getting from everybody. I don't know if I have any other updates. I know they're going to hit that webinar.
No, I think that's good.
Cool. And then as Reid said, did you already hit your Fiona thing that you wanted to?
Yep. I think we had a huge rush after the first webinar, and kind of have another, I guess, wave that I think is going to be hitting us here in the next few weeks. But we're going to be doing this through August. So ideally, the sooner the better, as far as getting people on, so that they can get those data insights as long as possible.
Cool. Well, Reid, Nicole, do you guys have anything else?
No, I'm just excited to see how the week over week data layered over seasonality. So I know we hit on some of that, but I think for me, that's been super exciting to see how that's going to shake out.
Yeah, I'll just say stay safe, stay sane, and, data's looking better.
Yeah, cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys in a month.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, see you.